Hello, welcome to day 51 of the Tao of Joy Every Day, Three Treasures. And the tagline I've chosen for this is Balance All Three. So, as Derek explains in the beginning of this chapter, there are different sets of three treasures in the world. In Buddhism, the three treasures are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which simply means, as we undoubtedly all know, Buddha is an enlightened being, Dharma is the teaching, and Sangha is the community, the spiritual community that we find and in the world that we name Buddhism. In the Tao Te Ching, the three treasures are compassion, conservation, and not daring to be ahead in the world. In the Tao, compassion is the source of courage. And when I think of compassion, I always think of the story of the Buddha. He spent his life seeking enlightenment, and he imposed just terrible austerities upon himself. And he reaches this point where he's meditating under the tree, and he knows he's about to die from starvation, and he thinks about how he's failed, that when he gets glimpses of enlightenment, as he's such a great meditator and so forth, but ultimately in the end, here he is with, about to die of starvation, and he's failed to obtain enlightenment. And a little girl sees this poor, wretched man starving under a tree. And she goes and gets some rice milk. And she walks up to him and hands it to him and simply says, "Drink." And of course, he takes the rice milk and he consumes it. And there's this moment between him and the little girl where her compassion flows to him, and he's aware of it. And he's transformed by it. As the story goes, this is what really starts him on the road to true enlightenment. First of all, it keeps him from dying. And then, of course, this example of loving kindness from the stranger is ultimately what he needed. He needed love and kindness. We all do. It's the most important thing you can give anyone, is loving kindness. It's the most important thing anyone can give to you. And when you use the treasure of compassion and you pour it forth into the world, it makes a difference. It can make a difference with your relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your elderly parent, with your friends, with strangers. You never know how your acts of loving kindness can ripple out into the world simply by giving someone a smile, or a greeting of good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Simply taking the time to listen to someone who wants to talk. These little acts that we do can have a far-reaching effect in the world. They can ripple out. And sharing love with each other is so important. But when you do it with pureness of heart, it truly makes you invincible. And when I think of using loving compassion and being invincible, I always think of Derek's story that he's shared with us called the Feng Shui Master, I believe. And this Feng Shui Master is walking through on his way, and he comes across this town, and it's at this point in his journey where he's literally dying of thirst. He didn't bring enough water with him, and he's gonna die if someone doesn't give him something to drink soon. And he comes across this woman, and she sees that he's in need of water, and so she offers him some water, and she pours it forth into a cup for him to drink, and she throws some rice in it and hands it to him. And he becomes angry because he's dying of thirst and he wants to guzzle the water down, and because she's thrown this rice into it, he's unable to, quench his thirst at the speed in which he wants to. And so the Feng Shui Master begins to talk to her, and he finds out, he explains that he's a Feng Shui Master, and she explains that, I'm starting a business soon. Can you advise me on the best place to start it? And he says, sure, I'll advise you. He thinks, I'm going to get my revenge on this woman. So he makes his calculations and finds the worst spot for anyone to do anything and expect success. And he shows right here. This is where you want to do it. And he goes on his way, happily saying, I got even with her. And years later, he comes back to the town, and he finds that this woman's business was a tremendous success. All her children are having success. She's a town elder, and everyone respects her, and success follows her everywhere, and she just can't seem to lose. Everything goes her way. It's almost like heaven itself has opened up and lended a hand. And he looks and he goes, what happened here? And he goes, so he rechecks his calculations, and he goes, no, this is definitely the worst spot to do anything, and she's built her business on the spot. What is going on here? And he just can't think. He goes, well, maybe it had something to do with the water. So he talks to her, and he says, hey, do you remember that day when I was first here, and you gave me the water, and you threw rice into it before you gave it to me? Well, why did you do that? And she says, oh, well, I noticed that you were at the verge of dying of thirst, and I knew that if I gave you that cold water and you guzzled it down, the shock to your system could have been very harmful. It could have, in fact, killed you. So I threw the rice in so that you would be forced to take it in slowly so as not to shock your system. And then he realizes instantly that she was acting out of loving kindness and compassion for him. She was looking out for him. And he knew then what happened. When you act out of true compassion and true loving kindness with purity of heart, you're invincible. It doesn't matter if you're standing on the worst spot in the town to do anything. You'll succeed. You'll be like Forrest Gump, right? Everything he touched turned to gold somehow. And so it was with this woman, and so it is with compassion and loving kindness. So the second treasure is conservation, as I've said. And of course, it's simply the wisdom to direct and use your energy efficiently. So let me just give you a very simple example from my life. So in the morning, when I'm getting the kids ready for school, one of the things that I do is I make a smoothie for everyone except Ellie because she won't drink it, but Christopher and Wendy and I both drink it. So I go to the garage where we keep the berries to get that, and if we need milk, I'll check to see if we need milk. I'll grab the milk and the berries together. But the other thing that I do is I take the little bag of recyclables that's in the kitchen, and I grab that, and I walk to the garage. I open the garage door, I go out, I dump the recycling in, and then I come back, go to the back refrigerator, pull out the milk if we need it, go to the freezer underneath, pull out the berries that may be needed for the smoothie or whatever fruit I'm going to use that I freeze for the smoothie. And then I go and I make the smoothie. Now, it may seem trivial, but if you think about it, by doing that, by not separating those tasks, I take one trip from the kitchen to the garage. Whereas if I separated those tasks, I'd have to take two separate trips. And so you think, well, how long what does that save? A minute? And yeah, it only saves a minute. But it's interesting if you can conserve your energy this way throughout your day, those minutes start to add up. And then over the course of the week, it can add up into even more minutes. And then over the month, into hours. And as you go on, days. And as you really go on and get good at it, before you know it, you will have saved years. And it's a simple way to remember the lesson.
Okay, so here's a better story by Derek that illustrates the point of conservation. In ancient China, there's these two friends who they become friends as they meet on opposite sides of a river to collect their water for the week, for the day, actually. And so every day they meet there to collect the water and they talk and they discover that they're both students of the Tao. And in speaking with one another, they notice that they're pretty much of equal understanding when it comes to the Tao. But one day, one of the friends shows up with his bucket to collect his water for the day, and his friend isn't there. And it's odd because they always arrive at the same time. And he thinks, well, maybe he just wasn't feeling well that day. But some time passes, and he really starts to worry about his friend, so much so that he goes and crosses the river and seeks out his friend's house. And sure enough, he finds his friend, and his friend is reading a book on the subject of the Great Tao. And he runs up to him and he says, hey, where have you been? And he explains to him, hey, I didn't want to worry you, but I don't have to collect water anymore because, I have a well on my property now. And just then the friend notices the well. And, they begin talking as they used to talk, and it's only been a few days since his friend hasn't been to the river, but he notices even in this short time of these few hours that he was able to save in this short few days, that his understanding of the Tao has surpassed that of his own by so much, because now his friend is able to dedicate himself to the study of the Tao. And what I like about this story that makes the point much better than my story about the milk and the berries is that it's not just enough to save the time, right? You can, if you save time so that you can be a couch potato and binge watch your favorite TV shows, um, that's not really going to help you very much. That's not practicing conservation uh, for any useful purpose. But if you take that time that you save throughout your day, um, however means you do it. I mean, in this case, the man who dug the well was very dedicated to doing so. I mean, he would come home from the river from collecting his water very tired um, from doing that and from doing all his chores around the house, but he would still climb down the well and dig out, even if he could only dig out a shovelful. And he was tired. He would do that because he surmised that, hey, every shovelful is a shovelful closer to my goal. And of course, eventually he hits the spring that's connected to the river, and so now he no longer has to walk to the river and haul a bucket back. Instead, he just lowers his bucket into the well and retrieves his water as needed, giving him time. Now, the important part of the story is what he does with the time, right? He gets a book, he sits down, he reads it, and he increases his understanding of something worth understanding. And so this has all the components of conservation, not only the time saving aspect, but putting the time to good use.
And then, of course, we have the last of the three treasures, not daring to be ahead in the world. And this simply means humility. And it's the recognition that arrogance will always, if you employ arrogance, it will always trip you up. If you're an arrogant person, you're doomed to fail. If you're if you haven't controlled your arrogant tendencies and then practiced acting in the world with a confidence and behind the scenes and not thinking that you're better than everyone else, by training yourself to realize that we're one in this world, to understand your place in the world. For me, I always think about where we as humanity sit in the world, right? Here we are in this little planet, the tiny blue dot, right? A reference to Carl Sagan and an image that the Voyager spacecraft took from distant space, looking back at Earth. Not very distant space, but looking back at Earth, and Earth is this tiny little blue dot. And so there we are, this tiny little blue dot in our solar system. And our solar system is this tiny little dot in a galaxy with tons of solar systems. And that galaxy is a tiny little dot in this universe that we find ourselves in. And this universe, as science is more and more beginning to tell us, may just be one of many, many universes. It may just be a tiny dot compared to a possibly infinite amount of universes out there in the emptiness of the Tao. And so, remembering our place in the world in that sense will definitely remind you that we're nothing. And yet, we're everything when we embrace humility, when we truly master humility, where we truly recognize that when you see the connectivity of others, when you truly understand oneness of all beings, when you truly understand the oneness of all the universes, of all the galaxies, of all the solar systems, of all the planets, of everything, that connection of it all, then you become a person who acts with humility and doesn't dare to be ahead in the world. And think about all the ways most people dare to be ahead of the world, right? To just the thing I think of when I think about daring to be ahead in the world, right? Would be, look how fast people drive through traffic so that they can race to the same stoplight. Whereas if you just sort of drive at the speed limit, you end up at that same stoplight just one or two cars behind them. What have they really gained? Wanting to be ahead in the world doesn't get anything. How many times do people wanting to be ahead at their company put other people down and try to make themselves look like the one who keeps the department going while this person messes up all the time, so that they can be ahead at the company? What do they really achieve by that? Well, first of all, no one will trust them. And if the people who you work with don't trust you, you're not going to accomplish anything. And ultimately, if you don't accomplish anything, you're not going to get anywhere. And yet, people, they do this all the time, right? They take the shortcuts. Instead of keeping their heads down, doing their job, not going to tell everyone how great a job they're doing, but to just quietly do what they're paid to do. Same thing with the business owner. He doesn't think of himself above his employees. He just does what needs to be done to make the business successful. And he acts behind the scenes to give everyone in his company what they need to do the job. And without taking any credit. And that's the guy who will have the successful business. He treats other people with kindness and compassion, right? He uses conservation because that's incredibly important in a business. And of course, he acts behind the scenes so that his employees will take the credit and they'll say, we did it together. And he's behind the scenes, and that's what he wants. He wants them to know that he's grateful. And as the success of the business grows, of course, he acts behind the scenes and makes sure that everyone is recognized and rewarded for their part in it. So if you can hold on to the three treasures of Lao Tzu, the results will amaze you. So what does that mean, to hold on to them? Well, it means to use them, learn them, master them all the time. And when you do that, when you hold them this way, hold them close to your heart, hold them in your mind, hold them with every bit of your being, the results will amaze you. People will come to your aid. Allies will appear right at the right time. Things connect in amazing ways. Um, I'm not going to give any examples because you'll find your own when you start putting these treasures we've talked about today into action. You'll see what I mean. Anyone who's done it, even if you haven't mastered it all, but hey, let's face it, we all have good days in the Tao, and sometimes we step off the path a little. But those days when we are on the path and we do what needs to be done, you know it, don't you? You may lay in bed at night and reflect on the day and realize, isn't it funny how that happened right when that happened, right when that happened, and how all those things are connected to make this happen. And you know, it's an amazing thing. Okay, so the opposites of the three treasures are brutality, waste, and arrogance. Now, we already touched a little bit on waste and arrogance. But there's brutality, of course, being the opposite of compassion. But why are we talking about the opposite? Well, oftentimes learning the opposite of something is helpful in understanding the the opposite that you want. So I often think of how our teachers come to us in many ways, right? If you've ever had someone who's brutal, or someone who encountered someone who's wasteful, or encountered someone who's arrogant, the best thing to do is think of them as teachers of how not to be. And to remember that where there's brutality, try to sow compassion. Where there's waste, sow conservation. And where there's arrogance, sow humility. The interesting thing about the opposites is that any of them will single-handedly lead to failure. It's sort of like just one nail on a horseshoe got loose, and because of that, the whole battle was lost. Right? Uh, that's all it takes. Just employ one of these three opposites of the three treasures of the Tao Te Ching, and this is what you'll end up with: failure. Success, by contrast, requires all three treasures. You can't just employ one of them and have the impact that you would if you can employ all three. So while one of the opposites can destroy everything, it's by acting together that all three treasures work together to create success. So the treasures can be learned and mastered separately. However, by bringing them together in balance and synergy, their combined effect will be greater than the sum of their separate effects. So that's the three treasures. Their power is that they lean and rely and hold each other up, just as we, when we're successful together, lean on, rely on, and hold each other up. And the great thing to remember is that the Tao is beyond value. It's priceless. And the three treasures, these three important components of the way of being, are also invaluable. But when they come together, they form this way of living your life and being aligned with the Tao. They're just an incredible combination. And if you follow them, if you learn to use them together in balance and synergy, you will become a limitless person. There is nothing you won't be able to accomplish. And the great thing about our little community here is we're here for each other. All of us are here. The Facebook group, all the people who post on there, whether it's asking a question or answering a question or speaking about a lesson that Derek's given, it's a wonderful way to come together as a community and for us to practice with each other the three treasures of compassion, of conservation, and of not daring to be ahead in the world. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope I said something that was of use to you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I would like to recommend the Tao of Joy Every to you, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action.